In this video, I'm going to show you my top tips for creating rules in your bank transactions feed in QuickBooks Online. Rules help us automate a lot of the data entry and workflow for our small business bookkeeping. So if you're using QuickBooks Online to keep track of your business's bookkeeping, a way to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and leave me a comment below letting me know if you learned something new. And we are inside of a sample company. This is not anybody's bookkeeping. This is fake numbers, a fake business, just that we can play around inside the QuickBooks Online environment, and so that I can show you some cool tricks for setting up rules inside of the bank feed. When you're in the bank feed, you're going to see all of your accounts up here at the top. You can click on each of these accounts to switch between the transactions that were imported from the bank. And I'm going to look inside the checking account right now. And I want to find a transaction by a vendor that I see multiple times. So this A1 rental is probably an equipment rental company because this sample company is like a landscaping design services company. So maybe they rent equipment on a regular basis from this same vendor. And I want to set up a rule because this vendor is always going to be categorized as equipment rental. When you want to set up a rule is whenever there is a transaction or a vendor that you keep going back to that's going to be categorized the same way each time, but that might have a different amount, such as your phone bill. Now, you may have a wireless phone service that is a different charge each month, and so you want to set up a rule to say that every time you pay Verizon Wireless or AT&T, that's going to be categorized as your cell phone or telephone expense in your bookkeeping. And so for this vendor, A1 Rental, what I'm going to do is highlight the words that are in the bank detail. And the bank detail is the memo or the description of the bank line item that was imported into QuickBooks. So this is what you'll see usually on your bank statement when it comes out every month. So I'm going to highlight the bank detail and Control-C on my keyboard or Command-C if you're using a Mac to copy that bank detail. You could also just type it in, but it goes much faster if we hit Control-C and we copy that text. Then I'm going to click on the Create a Rule button, and this pops up a little window for me. And from here, it's going to ask me, what do I want to call this rule? And so I'm just going to actually copy and paste the bank detail that I copied directly in here. This is going to be the name of the rule, and it's going to indicate to us what that rule is for. You can put any other information you want here just to name the rule. And then we're going to tell QuickBooks that every time we see this transaction or this bank detail, we're going to look in all of the bank accounts. Now, if you want to separate categories based on which account it comes out of, maybe sometimes when it comes out of the checking account, it could be supplies. If you're putting on a credit card, maybe that could be cost of goods. You get to decide. So if you're charging the same vendor to different accounts, like your checking account or credit card, and it needs to be classified differently every time, this is where you would come in and say, inside the checking account, categorize it this way. And then you would create another rule to maybe say whenever it comes out of the MasterCard or the credit card, it needs to be categorized a different way. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to keep it simple, and we're just going to select that any account that we see A1 rental coming out of is going to be classified as equipment rental. And now here is my trick to making sure that we actually set up this rule correctly so that it does the data entry for us. And that is to change this drop down from description to bank text. And this is kind of like an if-then statement, right? If we see this transaction with this bank text inside of the checking account or any bank account really, then we're going to do something with it. So up here at the top where it says apply this to transactions that are blank and include the following blank. Those are the if parts of our rule. QuickBooks is going to look for this criteria and find transactions that meet our criteria that we're telling it. So when I change it to bank text, for some reason, the description doesn't always grab the transactions, even if we set up the rule using the bank text that we copied and pasted from the memo. We want to change this to bank text. I don't know why this is the case, but for all of my clients and for my own bookkeeping, I have found that changing it to bank text is how we make sure that we grab every transaction that we want to with this rule. You can say the bank text should contain. You could say the bank text does not contain, but I don't recommend doing that for a rule where we're trying to set it up to look for these specific words or these characters. If you were making a rule like for fuel expense, sometimes when we go to the gas station, we're filling up our tank, right? And then we may go inside and buy a coffee or a Coke or a snack. And so for my clients that are charging fuel on their business accounts, what I normally do when I'm creating a rule about that is to say that I want not only the bank text to match maybe ExxonMobil, and then I would copy and paste that in here. But I want to tell QuickBooks to look only for transactions that are greater than, let's say, $30. For most of us nowadays, it costs at least $30 to fill up our tank of gas in our vehicles. And so if I'm running inside to buy a Coke, and that's like, less than $5 transaction versus what I'm paying at the pump to fill up my tank, I don't want to categorize paying for the Coke as a fuel expense category. Only want to grab the transactions that are over a certain amount. So you can decide this for yourself and say that normally I spend at least $30 whenever I'm filling up my tank at the pump. And so it's going to grab, all the transactions that are over that certain amount and that have that bank text in the memo. If you change this to any, that means that it's going to look for either the bank text containing this text or the amount being greater than $30. And so I would not use the any dropdown. I would tell QuickBooks I want it to match both of these conditions, right? If we're just telling it to look for any of these conditions, that means that it could pull all of the transactions greater than $30 and assign this rule to them. It doesn't also have to include this because we told it that it can just pick any of the criteria below. But since we're talking about equipment rental, that's not what we're doing for this particular rule, but I wanted to kind of show you and explain that when we have things like a fuel expense, because every time we go to the gas station, we might not necessarily be paying for filling up our tank. It could be running inside to grab some supplies or a snack, right? So creating this rule, I copied the bank memo text and put it in here. And then I told QuickBooks, for every bank account, look for bank text that includes or contains these characters. And so when it meets this criteria up top, then we're going to tell it what to do. When it finds transactions that meet that criteria, we're going to tell it that we always want to have a payee in our transaction line. And the category for this is going to be equipment rental, and that is already set up as a expense category on the sample company chart of accounts. I want to make sure that I uncheck the auto add function. I don't like this function. If you do like it, feel free to do it in your own bookkeeping, but for myself and all of my clients and all of my people who schedule a training on QuickBooks Online with me, I tell them to turn off the auto add feature. Because what happens is if you don't set up this rule correctly, QuickBooks is just going to go start adding all these transactions to your books willy-nilly, and if you have not taken the time to make sure that it's set up accurately, your books will be a mess. And most of the things that it categorizes will be wrong, and you'd have to go back and change everything. So instead of auto-adding, we're just going to tell QuickBooks to apply this rule, set the category, set the payee, and then don't do anything. And so I'll show you what happens whenever we've set up the rule. Just double check that we've got our category, that we do have a payee. It might include the memo down here. You can type something in to replace the bank memo for every transaction in the future, but I don't like that. I don't recommend it. So I like to delete the bank memo and leave it blank here. And so from here, we can actually test this rule. And so when we click test rule, it's going to go through and look in the transactions list in QuickBooks Online and see if there's something that this rule applies to. And so it's telling us this rule will apply to 2 currently unreviewed transactions. And that's a good thing. We know that we've set this rule up correctly if it does actually apply to stuff. And so from here, I'm going to click on save to save this rule. Now in your rules tab, we're going to come over from the bank transactions tab and we're going to go to our rules. And the most recent rule that you have created will be at the bottom of this list. So if you have a bunch of other rules that you created in the past and you create a new one, it goes to the bottom of the list. And so these are going to be listed in the order that you created them. But if you have multiple rules in here and you want to drag the priority and say, actually A1 rental, I want you to look at this criteria first, and if that doesn't match, then go to the next rule. You can click these 9 dots over here and drag and drop them into the priority order that you want. So you can always see your rules in here. You can make sure that they are active, and that the auto add is turned off. Because the auto add box is blank, that means I know that QuickBooks is not just going to automatically add transactions that meet this rule criteria. So back in the bank transactions tab, we can see in this that the A1 rental charges down here have now had this rule applied. But you'll notice that because we did not have the auto add feature turned on, that those transactions are still sitting here waiting for us to review them and to add them to the bookkeeping. Remember that the bank transactions feed, where I'm at right now, is a holding area of the transactions that were imported from the bank account. And we need to come in here and be the ones to review the information, make sure that it all checks out and that it's correct before we add and match things and send those transactions into our actual bookkeeping, into the check register. So I can see that this rule was applied, and I want to come in here and double check that yes, in fact, it did apply this rule correctly. And I have a vendor name and this account. We have a category and it is the appropriate category. And from there, I can click on add. Now, if you've created a rule to capture a bunch of transactions that are here in the bank transactions feed, once you've created the rule, what you can do to look at just that rule being applied is come up to this all transactions filter drop down and click on rule applied so that we only see the transactions that have a rule applied to them. And from there, we can select all and accept everything that we just created a rule for. I hope that was helpful. I hope you learned something. This is the procedure that I do with all of my clients' bookkeeping. This is what I teach people to do inside of a training on QuickBooks Online. And if you like this video, make sure to like this video, leave me a comment letting me know what you learned, subscribe to my channel, and check out my other videos on QuickBooks Online tutorials so that you can master QuickBooks Online for your business's bookkeeping. Thanks for watching.